Chapter 8, Part 2. On the morning after Clovis had been turned away from the house, the hairdresser came out from Manus to do Mrs. Carter's hair. At first he was silent and surly, but when he found that Mrs. Carter meant to pay him at last, he cheered up and gave them all the news. The actors had all been thrown out of the Paradiso and had got hold of a lorry and were trying to get off Brazil through Venezuela, where the British consul was supposed to be good-natured and inclined to turn a blind eye. But everyone thinks they'll be stopped at the border, said Monsieur Claude. Poor Clovis, said Mare when she heard this. The twins shrugged. He's only an actor, said Beatrice. A vagabond. They're used to wandering about. Clovis isn't, said Mare, but she said no more about him. Since Clovis had been taken away by Miss Minton, she had been quiet and subdued, scarcely speaking to anyone. But the piece of news that interested the Carters most was that the reward for the discovery of Tavernesson had doubled. It's 40,000 milreis now, said the hairdresser, crimping Miss Carter's card. They've put up notices everywhere. Imagine the dresses one could buy with that, said Beatrice. And the hat, said Gwendolen. And the shoes. And the chocolates. Boxes and boxes of chocolates. You could buy something a great deal more useful than that, said Mr. Carter. The full set of glass eyes from Queen Victoria's piano tuner, for example. He'd seen it in the catalogue. Or he'd pay off that shark Gonzales, from whom he'd borrowed money and was always pestering him. There's a new kind of wallpaper which stops insects from landing on it for 20 years, said Mrs. Carter wistfully. I read about it at the dentist. For a moment, all the Carters stood with narrowed eyes, thinking of what they would do with so much money. And on the following day, the Crows arrived at the bungalow. They had chartered a boat belonging to a wealthy merchant and landed at the Carters' jetty while the children were doing their lessons. Mr. Carter was out bullying his workers somewhere. When he saw the boat, he came in quickly. Mrs. Carter brought Mr. Lowe and Mr. Trapwood into the dining room, where Miss Minton was giving the twins dictation. Fetch Mayor, she ordered the governess. These gentlemen want to question everybody. The Crows sat down, twitching their black trousers up at the knees, so to keep the creases in. They liked the Carters' dining room, the smell of Lysol, the shrouded windows. A decent British household at last. Mayor was brought in. She recognised them at once, and the twins saw that she had turned pale. Mr. Trapwood did not waste any time. Some of you already know what I'm going to say. We have come from England to find a missing boy, the son of Bernard Taverner. It is now very important that he is found and brought back before the bishop sails. The reward for news of him has been doubled. Now, I want you to think very, very carefully whether you have any idea of where such a boy might be hiding. Mayor looked up. Why is he hiding? Why doesn't he come forward? Why doesn't he want to go back to England? The Crows frowned. Whether he wants to go back or not has nothing to do with it. The boy must go back at once. It's a matter of life and death. If we tell you something useful, will we get the reward, said Beatrice. Certainly, said the Crows. The twins looked at each other. We think Mayor's hiding him, said Beatrice. I had toothache last night and I woke up and I saw her sneak out to the end hut where the rubber workers used to live, the one that was empty. We don't know for certain, but that's what we think, said Gwendolen. She goes outside sometimes when she's supposed to be in bed. No, honestly, that's nothing to do with... Mary jumped up from her chair. I don't know anything about the boy you're looking for. All the same, I think I might ask these young ladies to take us to the hut they describe. Can I have your permission, Mrs. Carter? Said Mr. Lowe. Certainly, she replied, but if Mary has been deceiving us all, she'll be most seriously punished. Miss Minton had come to stand beside Mayor. If Mayor has really been hiding someone, she will certainly be punished, but I find this hard to believe. It isn't Bernard Taverner's son, honestly. But it was too late. The Crows had risen, and now everybody moved out of the bungalow, down the side path and towards the hut of Indians. Furrer and Tappy and old Lila were standing beside their door, looking on in silence. Miss Minton had taken Maya by the arm, as if she expected her to run away. Her nutcracker face was closed and angry. Mrs. Carter moved past the hut as if she were walking through an open drain, and the twins held their noses as they passed the pot-bellied pig. Please, began Mare, and stopped as Miss Minton's steely fingers dug painfully into her arm. Be quiet, Mare, she said. The hut was locked, but that didn't help them. Mrs. Carter shouted to Tappy to bring the key, and Tappy disappeared into her hut. She was away a long time, but eventually, sulkily, she brought the key. Empty, she said to the Crows. Not inside. Nada. All gone away. We shall soon see, said Mrs. Carter, and took the key. Mare bit her lip and stared at the ground. The lock was stiff. Give it to me, said Mr. Carter, taking the key from his wife. He fumbled for a while, then managed to turn it. The door swung open. There was a loud screech, a flutter of black wings, and a trapped bird flew out, sending Mrs. Carter reeling backwards. Then silence. On the floor of the hut was an old blanket. a candlestick with a spent candle, and nothing else. The hut was empty. Nobody in the Carters' bungalow slept well that night. The twins lay in bed thinking about the money that had escaped them. "I was going to get that blue silk cloak in Florette's window," sighed Beatrice. "It wouldn't suit you, the neck's too low," said Gwendolen. They began to argue, but then remembered that neither of them could buy the cloak. "All the same, I think Maya knows something. Did you see how worried she looked when they were opening the hut? She's just the sort of person who would try to be on the side of a runaway. Look how she tried to shelter Clovis." "But the Taverner boy isn't a runaway. He's a criminal. He must be, or they wouldn't be so keen to catch him." "Well, I'm going to watch Maya. I don't trust her at all," said Gwendolen. In their bedroom down the hall, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, too, were thinking of all that could be done with the reward for the capture of Taverner's son. "We can go back to England for a visit. I'm sure Lady Parsons would be pleased to have us stay." Mr. Carter did not answer. For one thing, he never spoke to his wife if he could help it, and for another, the last thing he wanted to do was to go back to England. He had left his job in the bank there in a hurry, quite a big hurry. If he stayed even a few days longer, then the police would have come for him because he had borrowed a lot of money that did not belong to him. And out here he was getting behind again with certain payments. The 40,000 milre would have helped to clear his debts. They wouldn't have been cleared all, but they would have helped. Mrs. Carter was frowning, thinking of Maya. "I really don't trust that girl, and that governess favours her." "Well, if you send her away, we're done for," said Mr. Carter. "I owe that rogue Gonzales 3 batches of rubber, and I haven't got one." "How can that be?" asked Mrs. Carter. "You wouldn't understand," said Mr. Carter warily. He sighed and reached for the lamp, but Mrs. Carter got up once more and took a flick gun from under the bed. She was almost sure that she had heard something buzzing by the window.